money.
For life.
Okay. All right. Chairman Anderson, do you want to chair?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So committee, great conference committee, quite frankly. So the way I look at it, the amendments that we had to the bill in the House mirror up with the Senate amendments in terms of there was a Baldwin Summers amendment to raise the floor on the first program from 15,000 to 20. So that's off, that's done. Okay. There was a Rothfuss-Greer amendment, which really, I think everybody on minerals knows that ended up being a minerals amendment, and those basically mirror up. So what we have that I see is we then have the Steinmetz amendment, which creates a fourth program with $50,000 in it, ran by different.
Oh, 50 million.
50 million. Sorry, getting that decimal wrong. I'm sorry. 50 million. $50 million in it for businesses that are closed. The House rejected that fourth program. We have a Kinski amendment that broadens the definition regarding business interruption and impact in both the first grant program and the second grant program. I think we all agree that it's probably appropriate in the second grant program, but we will want to discuss its appropriateness in the first grant program. And then there is the Beitman amendment regarding the removal of the 100 employee limitation, which did cause a great deal of concern in the House. So, you know, we're here not to win or lose, but to find a right compromise. I'd love to see us get this wrapped up and a bow put on it, and so that we could all go back and say, hey, we solved some problems with this.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one of the things that became very evident in the Senate as we discussed this is, and I guess particularly came from me and having had a lot of experience in the state of Wyoming has not been really successful in when we've been able to try to provide money for businesses, and our track record is not good. And this is a different situation. COVID has created these unusual opportunities, if you will, for businesses, for us to help businesses. You know, in terms of the loan versus grant, I got to tell you that to get go, I was pretty well locked in, and I thought we needed to do the loan. But I listened, and you know, I go along with what you and Senator Anderson and Rothfuss did, and Representative Burkhart and Representative Duncan, to bring what the minerals had done. You just need to have some sideboards or something. I think you got to be so careful, and you know, people are going to be lining up to get this, and you've created a situation where, you know, you could end up picking winners and losers. I still think that's an issue, but I'm sure willing to go with the grant program and see how we can make it work. And I think your amendments and what we do with the Beitman amendment on the 100 or fewer, I think Senator Rothfuss has some ideas, and the other one I kind of like. But I just want to let you know that I think at the end of the day, these, you know, we're going to have the grants, and we got to be real careful and hope the Business Council will be very diligent in their job.
Senator Beebe, I appreciate those comments, because I fought to the bitter end on a loan versus a grant on this, as you well know, and I agree. I've been very concerned that we have some accountability on these programs, one way or the other, and so that's a little bit of my concern was and why we're discussing these amendments. Is I see some of the Senate amendments as opening it up just a little bit more. So I think we can have a good discussion, and this good group of minds here, and find a good solution.
I think we're also relying on the Wyoming Business Council to write some sideboards on it too, though. We're not doing everything.
Yeah, very true. Sorry, my family is down branding, which is what I would rather be doing right now, and I have my daughter's little dog yapping in the background, so I apologize. Well, okay, so why don't we I think we can tackle these. So the first one, and I'm just calling this, it was the Steinmetz amendment that created the other $50 million by the SLIB board for businesses that were closed. And so that was rejected by the House. There was a mere amendment that came through. I saw the Senate divided that, took out some of the concerning language that might. Yeah, okay, I'll just leave it at that. So, I guess as we throw this out is, I don't have a problem taking those funds and moving them over into the first grant program in section 2, and devising some sort of preference, maybe that the first 2 weeks, or that 50 million, or maybe we say it's 25 million. I mean, we have this breadth, whatever the committee wants to do. And say that for the first 2 weeks that grant program is open, that pot of money, that 50 or whatever amount we say, $50 million, goes to those businesses that apply that were closed. And that would be, I think, the same intent, but just get it all back to just 3 programs instead of 4. Yeah, go, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keep in mind too, as we discuss this, there are several businesses that closed that weren't mandated to close. There was a lot of retail stores and different places that closed that they weren't specifically mandated to close. So there is that a little bit of a blurred line there when we talk about businesses that were closed, because some were forced, like our hairdressers, our barbers, those were definitely forced. However, the restaurants could still do takeout, bars could still do curbside or takeout and drive-through. But our retail, there was quite a few retail that closed by choice, versus others, because they didn't do, like a lot of our bigger retailers didn't have to close. They just needed to limit the number of people coming in and out and stuff. So there's that right there that could be tricky how we talk about closures.
Okay.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, the discussion we had in the Senate, and certainly those are situations that I don't think this applies to, but there are situations where it does. And I like the, Chairman Greer, I kind of like your idea, and Senator Anderson has some ideas and thoughts on that, but we don't need another 4th program. I agree with that. But I think the language
exactly.
we're trying to accomplish needs to be in there. So yeah, I think those ideas make sense, and how we fine tune it. I think we ought to keep it at 50 million. And then let's try to do that, bring that language in.
I'm all ears. Burkhart, or Representative Burkhart, and Chairman Anderson. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with that we don't need to set up another specific additional program. We can merge this into others. The other issue I have is, this puts a lot of work onto the SLIB. And if you think back to the past session, there were a lot of things given to the SLIB that they were to do. And I really think the Business Council is already set up to do a lot of this. And that I think they've already done some pre-work. I think it would be a much quicker process to let them do it rather than the SLIB board.
Yeah, Chairman Anderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A good point, Don. We discussed that also. What would you guys think of putting that into section 2 and making it a new paragraph at the end of section 2, which section 2 is 50 million for business interruption stipends, and putting that 50 million in there, and have the WBC run it, and have it for the funds were directly required to close by COVID-19 closure orders. And that's just that section by itself alone. And then the governor can move that money out of there if he needs to put it into the first part of that section. And it would not be a new section. It would just be a new paragraph on section 2.
So Chairman Anderson is sort of going to be a sub-grant within that grant program. Is that kind of?
Yeah, yeah.
I like it because that was initially, I mean, as we were developing this, that's what I was initially thinking that first grant would be for. So it kind of grew. So I don't know, House members,
Yeah,
I'm fine
I
with
can,
it.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, Senator Bebout.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are you talking about the business interruption stipend program that's already in the bill and tag it on to that? And if you are, I think that makes a lot of sense. I would move that we do that and move it into a separate section under that, the Wyoming Interruption Stipend Program. I don't have the page in line, but Brian's on the line and Anna, they can do that. And then I would like to incorporate the language that the Steinmetz Amendment had as to how you do that. But I agree with Reverend Burkhart. Let's have the Business Council do it. I think SLIB got their hands full. That would be my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So Senator Bebout, what do you want that to be, the flat amount, or they can just apply like was in the Steinmetz Amendment, that they would go through and determine the loss of income, change in expenses, or do you want them to be a flat amount? What when you were saying incorporate those items, what specifically were you thinking?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was thinking that, not to do the same stipend as it is there, but to incorporate her language and allow it to drive that part of the interruption stipend program. That's what I envisioned. The language would be her language.
And Mr. Chairman, that language is
What I'm saying?
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Senator.
So that language is compensation factors include for lost income and revenue, additional expenditures, receipt for other public COVID pandemic support funds, and factors determined by Wyoming Business Council.
Okay. And so then to further develop this, if I were one of the businesses that was forced to close and I apply for this grant, I'm gonna get a preference on there. So it's probably, I mean, it was a small list of folks, right? But I think we've got to be clear on this. Then I also don't get to apply for the other portion of the grant in section 2. Is that fair statement? However, I do get to apply for the section 3 grant.
Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you hit on a good point there. And I think what it is all of us, I think, unless I'm mistaken, look at this as either one, section 1 or section grant 1, stipend 1 grant or stipend 2. You get a choice. You don't get to double and triple dip. I think that's an appropriate way to do it. Is it's one or the other.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think also that it's both of them are 50 million, so it shouldn't be a nosebleed for any applicant.
Yeah, Senator Bebout, sure.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I'm hearing you correctly, I would agree you couldn't do both, but if they apply for the first one and for whatever reason it gets into a little bit about what Representative Duncan said, then you shouldn't block them off from going to the other one. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, yeah, I think that we should be very clear about that structure. I think everyone will want to apply on the simple form that we have set up in this first stipend program in section 2, because it's easy. What we're talking about adding with the Steinmetz Amendment is going to be a little more complicated. So if it amounts to more, it should be there to augment and say, all right, well, you got your first $23,000 or whatever it may be. But pursuant to this paragraph, we can augment those funds because of the forced closure loss of revenue, something along those lines. It's going to require a little bit more evidence, but again, I think that's consistent with what Representative Burkhart's saying, where you can't get them both separately, but let's make sure they work together well, and
Yeah.
you don't hurt yourself by applying to one or the other.
Senator Rothfuss, it's a good point, because the whole concept that we've discussed over the last couple of weeks regarding Grant 1, Section 2 was a one-page application. That's why it has a floor amount and a really easy multiplier, so that could be looked at in 5 minutes. It could be filled out in 5 minutes, looked at in 5 minutes. And that was sort of the beauty of that program. We could get that rolled out in 2 weeks, and those funds to those people that needed it the most. If we do bring in, as a motion that we've got, all these other things, that does become a much more complicated process and looks a lot more like what we've got for the grant program 2, which is in Section 3. So let's just think about that, Senator Bebout, this, the quick hitting being simple component.
It
Well,
may make,
Mr. Chairman, I would agree that you, and part of my amendment would be to make it so it's more user friendly. Clearly, that would be the idea, and that's what I'm hearing you're saying. I would support that.
Yeah. But Brian, are you able to start? And we got Brian and Anna. Is that our staff? Is that right? Yeah, Brian, you've been living with this. From what you heard, do you have some thoughts or how you might be able to bring us? So, I mean, we all want the same damn thing, let's face it. So can you help us get there?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, here's what I understand so far. So we would roll over the $50 million that was included in Senator Steinmetz's amendment into the Section 2 program. Then that would increase the appropriation to 100 million total. Of that 100 million, 50 million would be set aside for what I'm hearing is a supplement specifically for those businesses that were required to close. The definition that's included in that amendment captures, those specific businesses. I think the only question that I have that is not resolved is the level of detail required for this, kind of whether it's an addition to the original Section 2 grant or a supplement, and then regardless, what are the parameters for getting those extra funds for the closure itself?
Okay, so committee, sorry to keep talking, but to keep it simple and fast moving, I'll just throw this out for consideration. This allow them to get the quick hitting grant, the 20,000 and then 2,000 for each employee.
yeah.
And then apply for that above and beyond following the Steinmetz conditions that Senator Bebout's advocating. Now, and that would work, I think, pretty well. It might disqualify them for, or might limit what they get in the Section 3, but what's it matter? They're getting it, right?
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. It should limit what they get because they've already received.
Yeah, and that language is in Section 3. So
Would it make sense? I like where this is going, to be clear. But I'm curious from Brian's drafting standpoint, would it make more sense for this augmentation to be present in Section 3 instead of Section 2? Or does it work better from a drafting standpoint in Section 2? I think the concept is clear what the intent is.
that's a good question. Good question.
And Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I guess, I'll respond with a question as well. And that is, there are definitions in both Section 2 and Section 3 slightly different. I know Section 3, there's amendments to discuss, what parameters should apply, I guess whether the definitions in Section 2 and 3 as they exist now should apply to these businesses who are required to close. Would probably be the structural question for where it would go. I think otherwise, in terms of a supplement, if it's augmenting it, the placement is, in that regard wouldn't matter, but the definitions may.
Yeah, I think from that standpoint, Mr. Chairman, the Steinmetz amendment eligibility is certainly more similar to Section 3 than Section 2. I think it's a really broad eligibility. where remember section 2 is less than 50 FTE. Section 3 is, depending on which chamber, either less than 100 FTE, or in the Senate position. And right now it's that's been removed. So from that standpoint, section 7 as adopted by the Senate probably is closer to section 3. But again, I'm happy with it in either place, to be honest with you. We just need to figure out where it fits better and does a better job.
Mr. Chairman, I like the idea of that not having 100 employees or 50 employee limit on it. I'm concerned if we move it to section 3, if it can be fast moving and fast hitting as section 2 is predicted to be. So I'm okay with either place also, but just so that the company can apply for it and get it done in a hurry. I wonder if we want to modify that to say that they get 25,000, and then if they produce the compensation factors, including the loss of income, blah, 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 they could get more. But then that becomes a lot more like section 2. I don't know.
We're all saying the same thing. We just got to find the right way to,
Yeah.
to pigeonhole it in there and make it work. That's all. So, I mean, I don't think we disagree with each other. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I like the idea of the more stringent parameters going into the bigger bucket, the second bucket, to where that was the intent of that, is that was the 100 from the House version, that was the 100 employees or less, and it had a little more teeth in it because you qualified for more money. So you know, with these rules and parameters on that amendment, it seems to me that it would work in that section better. That's just my.
Yeah, as I keep thinking about this, there's a little beauty to this, in that they would be able to get that first grant quickly, and then there would be a segmented bucket for those businesses. So they're not, because one of the things we did here, the Minerals Committee will remember this, was that, and it's not a knock on these businesses that were shut down, but as a general rule, they were very small businesses that were less sophisticated than some of the others, and it was difficult for them to apply or to get organized, apply for PPP. So it would ensure if it took them a little bit of a time to apply for the second component, we would have 50 million preserved for them. So there is there's some logic to that. So I don't know. Sarah Bebout, it was your motion. We just butchered the heck out of it. Your thoughts?
Oh, I think everything you said would be considered friendly amendments to it, Mr. Chairman. And as I think about it, and I look at section 2, you know, up to the 50,000, you know, these businesses that have been forced to close are the smaller ones. And you need to get the money out for the first part of it, but boy, they should be further eligibility for them to do this as well. They are really hurting. I mean, you know, they were told to close their doors, and in some counties there was no reason to close those doors. So I think that might work, and I think everything we've said in terms of taking SLIB out and doing it as a sub grant to this one on section 2, I think that's what my amendment says, Mr. Chairman. If Brian's got it, maybe he could read it back to us and tell us, but I think we're all set.
Yeah. Well, okay. So Senator Bebout, the only thing is move this to grant to the section 3 grant, the second grant. Let them get the first grant quickly and then apply for this to augment that and have it preserved for them. Is that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, are you talking about they would all be under section 2, or you're going to move it to the next one, the second part?
We were discussing moving it to section 3 and having it preserved for that. So that they would get section 2 grants, right? First grant, and then they would have their own bucket to prove up under the Steinmetz requirements, but they wouldn't be competing with bigger, medium-sized businesses to see who could get in there first.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you worked this bill for 2 solid days, and you know, you guys, all of you know a lot more than I do there. But if you get into the section 3, which is the mitigation stipend program, I'm sorry, you get into the 300,000. So are you saying that if you would put it in there so they would have an opportunity for the 300,000 up to 300 and also an up to additional 50? Is that what you're saying if we put it in section 3?
No,
No.
what I would, Senator Bebout, is that there will be, instead of 175 million in there, there'd be 225, but 50 of it would be preserved for these businesses that were closed. And then they could go, I don't, a lot of them are small. I don't think they'd go up to 300,000. At least I would, God, I hope not, just because it's devastating. But they wouldn't have to compete with bigger businesses for those loans. They would be preserved for them.
And then that also has the 100, or is that where we have the 100 employees or less? That's that amendment, right?
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. I consider, if you think that's the best way to go, what we really need to do, the overriding factor, is to have a separate tranche somewhere for them that they have access to that because they were forced to close.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
Everyone agrees on that, I think. Yep, good.
So Brian, or Senator or Chairman Anderson, you're muted, Chairman. You're muted. You're on mute. Chairman Anderson, you're still muted.
Yeah,
Turn your mic on.
There you go.
I'm wondering if we do want to limit that, what Senator Bebout's talking about. If they apply for the first one, they are up to 50,000. And if they apply for this one, that could be 350. I wonder if we want to make this one limit it to 150 or something, that they would only get 200,000 out of the program. Otherwise, they have the possibility of getting 350,000, which might be all right for some of the smaller businesses.
Yeah. Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, I think we're fine with leaving it unrestricted because of the fact that these other conditions, which I assume Brian will probably include in his drafting, are there, which is, where is it? A loss of income and revenue as a result of the ordered closures, changing the amount of expenses. There are some provisions that were in the Steinmetz amendment that I think would dictate what an appropriate ceiling is as the business council considers it. So I don't know that we need a separate cap on it, but I think having the separate tranche for the reasons that Chairman Greer is talking about is perfect.
And I agree. I think that we rely on the business council who's going to be doing these applications and rules and regs with this. They'll be able to know who's already applied for what, and if they have extenuating circumstances to where they really need that extra, then they'll be able to make that decision.
Exactly.
All right. Brian, can you maybe bring us home on this?
All right, Mr. Chairman. So here's what I have. We're going to move this amendment 2001.01 into section 3. The 50 million will roll into the appropriation. It'll be 225 million, with 50 of that set aside for eligible businesses who are required to close, who will apply, pursuant to rule of the council, and compensation under that subsection will be based on the factors listed in the amendment.
Sounds good to me. Senators?
You want our votes? I'm in.
Sounds
All right.
good.
High five. We move to the next one.
Okay.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, before
Yeah,
we do
go
it,
ahead,
I have a general question. So assuming a business is going to apply now, would they be able to get 500, 300 and another 100? So will they be able to get $900,000?
I'm going to say that the answer to that question is it would be highly, highly unlikely.
Yeah.
And the reason, and it's part of the reason we need to discuss that 100 employee issue. Is I cannot think of a business that would qualify for all 3 grants, but there may be one. I just can't think of one.
Well, and to get to that 100 employees too, Mr. Chairman, and help me out, Senator Anderson or Senator Rothfuss. I think that I might have voted to keep it under 100 on that one. I think I did, but it passed fairly strongly in the Senate to take it over 100. I think, is that not correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bebout, I thought on the 100 or fewer, I voted against it. I would have said that one was in the ballpark, close. And I thought the other one was relatively wide margin. But Chairman Anderson, what do you recall? Maybe we can get those votes. Let me see if I can pull them up.
Yeah, maybe we could look
Let's
at
go ahead and
that.
discuss that issue. We're on it, and it's the one is a problem. Yeah. Let's go with Chairman Anderson was going to say something. I interrupted, and then Representative Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, we kind of made that the first section, section 2, was the first tranche for smaller companies, 50 or less. Then the second tranche was 100 or less. Then that third tranche was the larger companies, and they wouldn't necessarily all get in on each one. And we were trying to satisfy everybody with all sizes of companies. It wasn't our original thinking that each one of them would apply for each area, but maybe a section 2 could apply for a section 3, but probably not a section 4. So I think the 100 employees is important for our thinking on section 3. So I think that section 4 is unlimited employees, but that was kind of the
thing
thing.
to think of a compromise on that. You know, I'm gonna tell you, just as the minerals committee, we worked it, and you know, the bringer of the amendment was on the minerals committee and never raised it. And so you know, I mean, but we all think of things later. I understand.
So, Mr. Chairman, let's just go through that one more time. So on the section 2, it's for 50 and under, and that's get the money out quickly, the 50 million. Section 3 would be the 300, but plus now the additional 50 million we put in there, and that would be for 100 and under. And then section 4 is over 100, where you go up to $500,000, right? Is that the House position they would support?
We would, Senator. Yes. So I got sorry. I think Senator Rothfuss had his hand up, and then Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This is easier when we're at a table together, right?
It is, yeah. Mr. Chairman, there is a compromise position to consider, I think, for the 100 or fewer employees, which was the original Beitman amendment, which was adopted in the Senate and then was superseded by the joint amendment, the Minerals Committee amendment. And that was to basically prefer 100 or few employees, excuse me, as opposed to having it as a solid cap. I think that's an option for us to potentially discuss. It is a compromise position. I don't know what anyone else's thoughts are on it, but I'd be happy to hear them.
I have some thoughts, but go ahead, Representative Burkhart.
Mr. Chairman, actually, I think that Representative Duncan was next.
Okay, sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. I was just going to agree with Senator Anderson. I think I want to hold pretty strong to what we worked in the committee. We heard lots of testimony, and I feel pretty strongly that the 100 and less employees is pretty important.
Yeah, Representative Burkhart.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just thinking back to the committee discussion, because we held to the 100 employees, there was a lot of discussion about what about some of the larger companies who have really, they have suffered. I don't want to use company names, but companies who have kept their people whole, but at the same time have taken a hit by everything that's resulted from coronavirus. And the discussion is right now, quickly, we need to take care of these smaller businesses. We need to help these people how we can in a manner that directly helps them. And that knowing that another session is coming and we have a committee meeting between now and then, that we would try to address the issues with the larger companies then. Section 2 was, to me, intended to give the really small companies, even the individual proprietorships, some immediate help. A cosmetologist who really shut her doors or his doors and had no income, period, done. They couldn't. To address those and do it in a very, very quick manner. Section 2 was then to take care of maybe little larger companies and maybe have them in some way prove that they have needs out of all of this. Then Section 4 was to cover anyone, and we limited to 300,000. We heard testimony that some of our mining companies are spending 100 to 200,000 a month on extra safety equipment, cleaning, personnel, and that to meet the requirements, and we put no cap on that as a way to help them with those needs. So I think in the spirit of that, I would stay with the 100 employees, and we'll consider the larger companies as we go forward. They might be in a better position to, take care of their people, but they're going to need some help in the long run, I think. But we need to take care of these smaller and medium-sized businesses, which I think I remember testimony that 98% of the businesses in Wyoming are less than 100 employees.
Yeah, that's right. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, Don, would it satisfy you to have that the prefer 100 employees or less rather than a straight 100 employees, or you want the real 100?
100 employees was a nice round number, but what happens if someone comes in with 101 and has needs? So I think preference, but my issue with the word preference is how do you define preference? Most people know that I'm pretty much of a stickler on being very specific in legislation so that we don't have to go let the courts decide later. But, I think preference can work. If a company comes in with 105 employees and shows a real need, I wouldn't want to kick them out.
So, okay, so just a couple of thoughts here, a couple of comments. One is Minerals has got to get busy on the first, and we got to find relief for when the oil price goes up, that we get people back drilling in Wyoming, and that's not going to be with a $300,000 grant. We've got to. There are bigger steps we're going to have to take. Okay. Two, and I answered this directly, honestly, bluntly on the House floor, much to my own chagrin, and it was, what about agriculture? Agriculture is not going to realize their losses until later in the year. And so having funds around at that point in time, I wouldn't mind, but I just feel it's going to be difficult for agriculture to partake in this. They're an important segment of industry that's being affected as well. I don't like the preference, and the reason I don't is because it's hard to define. But here is a possible middle ground, because I don't want this to be a take it or leave it proposition. So there are some of the Wyoming companies that I visited with that are a little bit bigger, like 120, 130 employees, actually have separate operating entities. They may have one or two or three LLCs or corporations. What we could do is say that that the grants under this could be applied for based on an EIN. Okay, so your employees are tied to your EIN, but in no case shall any one common holding group receive more than 3 grants. Senator Rothfuss is wrinkling his eyes, but
I'm just trying to imagine how that could play out.
well, and so this taken oil field oil service company, which are Wyoming companies, in which on March 15th were larger. One may have one component that is doing hauling, okay, or movement, and they may have another segment that is doing dirt work, just for example, and they keep that separate, and they have separate EIN, separate books, but common ownership. Okay, but they'll have employees under one EIN and employees under another EIN. So that means you get out of this if I get 105 employees. So they could apply for a grant, standing basis on the balance sheet of that one subsidiary, and then on the other subsidiary based on their EIN. Okay, but we wouldn't want somebody to stack 10 of them together. And so then maybe we would cap it with three 3 loan applications for any 80% common ownership type of deal. Start to sound like the IRS, sorry.
Did I just lose the computer system?
No, we're here.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to refresh those that were on minerals and to help Senator Bebout remember or to know, some of the testimony that we received was by one particular owner who had 20 different something businesses across the state. The service industry is who got really hammered in this virus shutdown. And so they may have several different restaurants that are different employees and they are different LLCs. And so they have different needs. Some may have been okay. So one of the restaurants may have been okay, but the other one is not. And so this would help that situation because they would be different LLCs or they would be different from it wouldn't be just one company. So that was the example that we received. So I'm good with Chairman Greer's direction in thinking because of that example.
Okay. Representative Burkhart, then Senator Bebout.
the other idea would be to, give the business council some latitude to adjust for, companies with 105 employees. I guess I would really hate to see a company with 105 employees who really does have need be told, well, gee, the cutoff is 100. Fire, you should have fired 5 employees. I don't like that logic. So maybe if we can give them some latitude for good cause or let them make a decision. But I know that opens it up then that you're going to get a company with 106 employees who doesn't get it and that. So just some thoughts there. While I'm real specific and like hard, fast numbers, we picked 100 because it was a nice round number, and 20,000 plus Wyoming companies have, I looked at information, have 100 or less employees, and there's about just under 400 that have over 100 employees. So I think we're targeting the smaller companies here. And I would just say, a company in my district, and we aren't supposed to use names, so I won't, have done yeoman duty in keeping their people employed. They have way over 100 employees and would get nothing out of this. And I think that's something we need to consider later. But this was a quick hit for the smaller to medium-sized companies. So I'm willing to listen to options, Mr. Chairman, on what we can do for, the number of 100.
Senator Bebout.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things, and Chairman Greer, I agree with you. The oil field service sector has been really hammered, and I can tell you for a fact that their business in one day went down by 97%. And it's not a matter of having something that the revenues go to zero, and they've been hammered. And so what you're saying is that, and there's different entities that own different parts, and I'm one of those. And part of it has been really hammered, and others may be doing a little bit better. And so I get that, and I think you're moving in the right direction. The question I have for the committee, one of the things comes to mind are these movie theaters, and they're all around the state, and they have separate LLCs, and each one of those is actually an independent operating situation. So under this, what we're talking about, and they would be under 100 employees, and each one of those would be able to apply. Am I right in that regard? Because that makes sense to me.
Senator Bebout, and then I'll go to, my thought was that they could apply for the parent. Okay, so you can only get 3 applications per parent or per common holding group. And I'm just picking the number 3, but so that, yeah, like if you had 20, you couldn't aggregate, you couldn't get $6 million.
Good.
But that's all is you'd have to put a cap on the common, I guess you would just call it the parent or the common holding company. And I pulled 3 out of the air, quite frankly. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I like your EIN number, using that. That's a good idea, but I do not like any three for an 80% ownership. And the problem that I have is we got a lot of businesses in this state that have made investments in various towns in Wyoming, and each business stands alone. A restaurant business is a good example. A guy has 6 different restaurants in 3 different towns in Wyoming, and each one of them has the same problem. I can't see holding his feet to the fire for only 3 of those because he's made the investment, built a building and everything to put that in there. The oil field is the same way. They have multiple businesses, and each one they've made capital investments in. It isn't like they've only made capital investments in 3 or 4 of them. They've made them in every one of them. And they had hundreds of employees in each one. I don't see limiting that to 3. I understand what you're trying to do there to not have those holding companies making that much, but those holding companies are the ones that have been making the investments in Wyoming and in our infrastructure. So I have a little problem with holding them to 3, or any number for that matter. Not 3 isn't.
Yeah, I just concerned that, as you roll out one grant, the second grant's easier and the third one's much easier. And pretty soon somebody could have 10 grants out there and be ahead of everybody else. That's part of my concern. Senator Rothfuss, yeah.
Yeah, I'm wary of the cliff effect concept also, and imagine a circumstance based on the scenarios where we've got one corporation that has a unified structure just because it worked for their business model. They've got 101 employees. They might even have 5 different locations, but unified business model, full ownership, no LLCs, whatever the case may be, 101 of them. Then you've got someone else that did a distributed EIN model, and they've got 370s. So 210 employees versus 101. One of them is eligible for 900K. The other one's eligible for 0. All right. That we're creating pretty substantial cliff effects. And I think the concept here is all of us probably share a common interest that we want to be prioritizing smaller businesses that are the most affected. We already have the most affected as part of this legislation. Maybe we just go with some simpler language where we remove the cliffs and say smaller businesses shall be prioritized, clearly prioritized, seriously prioritized, something along those lines, just trying to indicate these interests, but giving the flexibility to the business council to not establish cliffs.
What about Burkhart's like good cause? Leave it at 100 and then say the council may have flexibility for good cause or something like that. So you got Representative Burkhart?
Mr. Chairman, that's just what I was thinking, is if we give the business council some discretion for good cause for those companies who might have over 100, leave the 100 in there, but say, may it consider other companies based on good cause, and leave it at that, based on their discretion for good cause under their rules.
I like that.
Explain that to the floor. That's all. Let's just.
I can't explain that to the floor. It is kind of loose and nebulous, and we would be relying on the council to come up with some criteria.
It might be a way to get home, though. I know this is going to be a sticking point, and I'd like to find some compromise language. So maybe a way to get there. Yeah, go ahead, Representative Duncan.
So, Mr. Chairman, I really like that, because also remember, we have this application process for this section that we're talking about. So that puts that criteria on there that they actually have to prove that, yes, I was harmed. Yes, this is why I was harmed. So it's not just a here, give me write off, they have to prove their harm. They have to prove that this is why I need it. And they have these extra steps and hoops that they have to jump through. So having the business council say, well, if you have above and beyond a little extra because you have 105 employees, show us why you need that extra. And maybe some of your business owners don't claim themselves.
Yeah.
That gets you under the 100.
That may be the way to go. And I was looking at some business council rules, and I think they kind of follow that EIN rule generally as well. So maybe we just, maybe less is more in this situation.
Mhm.
I don't know. Senator Bebo, what are your thoughts on?
Well,
this?
Mr. Chairman,
Wrap
first
this
of
up.
all, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're talking about section 3 on the 100, right?
Yes, sir.
What we're
Yes.
talking about. And I like Don makes a good point, and I think the way you do that is you give the flexibility back to the business council. I mean, they're going to be doing it anyway with their rules, and we can say 100 or less and put some language in there. Brian's good at doing that gives them a little flexibility. And then we've accomplished what we want to try to do to the Senate position, and I think we made an effort to try to compromise the House position. So
Is there a
it's not
second?
gonna get to the area where it's 300 people, but you got section 4, you can
Yeah.
have 500 people.
Is there a second to the president's motion? All right. What's everybody? I guess this is a little thumbs up on that.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
All right. Thank you, Senator Bebout.
I guess.
Okay, so then this pull up the last one I think remaining. It's Senator Kinsky's amendment. And so what this does, so it's Senate third reading amendment number 2. Okay, and so you've got to kind of look at the bill too. So let's go to page 6, because I agree with half of the amendment. And you guys may talk me into agreeing with all of it or agreeing with none of it. I really don't have my mind. So, okay, so what we dealt with in preparing the bill was required closure. So we said required closures if business was ordered by the state to close. And then we said required closure shall also include the interruption of businesses, normal business as a result of any closure of public health orders. So some of that is language right from the federal guidance, which was in effect at the time, and I think might still be in effect, but we don't know. This seems to me opens this up a little bit more. And it says, or as a result of the public health crisis. Now, I don't have a problem with that in the second grant program, section 3, but doesn't that make that a little too broad in the first grant program, section 2?
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, which amendment are we discussing?
Senate File 1004, Senate third reading amendment, Senate third reading amendment number 2, Beitman amendment.
Okay,
I don't think-
I just need,
Line 8.
Yeah,
I don't
Senator
think it-
Bebout.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is under what we call the section 2, right?
Yeah, the first one, there's 2 separate, one on lines 1 through 3 is the section 2, and then the other one is the section 3. And so my thoughts are for section 2, it is too broad. For section 3, it's probably okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the point I would make under section 2, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing from everybody is that's where the move is to get the money out the door. And that to me is up to the 50,000, right? I mean,
That's correct.
everybody's nodding head. So why would you not make it a little broader if you weren't trying to get the money out the door? What's the concern there?
Okay.
We're going to have the
So,
business council looking at it. They're still
Yeah.
going to evaluate it, and we're getting the money out the door, which is the whole thing we've been trying to do.
yeah, so the concern is that program was initially designed for those that fell through the cracks, that didn't get, and there is a preference in there for those that didn't receive PPP. Okay, and we were looking for those that were directly and immediately affected by public health orders. Okay, and that interruption of business associated with those public health orders. So it was a little smaller group, where the section 3 was a much broader group of everybody that's just getting hammered by the whole damn situation. So, but yeah, I'm open on this. Senator Rothfuss?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Greer, I don't think it affects section 2. I mean, as I'm looking at it, it looks like it hits the findings and then it hits section 3 going into the Rothfuss amendment, which is our Minerals Committee amendment. and redefining it in there while skipping over section 2 and not amending it.
Is page 6 not section 2?
Page 6 is findings, I
No,
think.
page 6
Oh.
is section 2.
No, it's section 2.
Is it section 2? I'm sorry. My apologies. Okay.
No, it's section
Okay.
2.
Would be the first time I read a bill wrong.
Nope. All right. Good. All right. Understood. Thanks.
Chairman Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I like the idea of opening that up a little bit. The reason to open that up a little bit is there's restaurants that weren't required to close. There's a lot of businesses that weren't required to close, but they had to because the business just dumped on them. And I like the idea of putting them into section 2 and 3, actually.
So Senator Anderson here, I agree with your comments 100%. And I think the bill without this amendment accomplishes that in section 2, because it says shall also include the interruption of the business's normal business. And that was designed specifically for those restaurants that may have done 20-30% business. And I'll just say this, if we go with this broader definition, that means like oil field service companies, companies like mine, any company that was affected by this, but still was maybe remained open and operating, would apply for that first grant. That, I think it broadens it. Senator Rothman.
Thank you. Well, what if as the compromise, then we just cut this one straight in half?
I would be very happy with that. I don't have a problem with it being in the second, or excuse me, the third section, second grant, because you have to apply for that.
Right. It'll be
You have to
reviewed.
show
Exactly. A lot of
thought.
thought will go into it. Sure.
Yeah.
All right. I'll make that motion.
Well,
What was the motion that?
Yep. Go ahead. Sorry. Withdraw the motion. Go ahead, Eli.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
just
Senator.
a second, Chairman. So, when I look at this there's different counties that have different situations and different public health officials. And in my county, we asked a question if the governor said open up, and he said, well, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to say stay closed. If we allow this broader language in there, does that not protect those counties that have that where an overzealous public health official, just to cover CYA more or less, said we're going to shut it down regardless? Would this not help that situation if in those areas or in other areas where it doesn't have an effect that makes sense? But what about those areas?
So Senator Bebout, and we had that discussion when we vetted this language initially, and that's why this it says or public health orders, and that was a discussion. I think it came from the Wyoming people do the horse racing, right?
The horse racing and the mortuaries.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the more those were, and that's why we added that or public health orders, so it wasn't specific. So I know that was our intent, Senator Bebout, to address those differences. I don't want to say disparities, but differences between counties and counties' positions on enforcement. Yeah, Senator Anderson.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, can we go back to Senator Roth's motion? I don't quite know what it was. I think he was going to split something or something.
Sure. I'll make that motion. See if everyone's comfortable with it. That we split Senate File 1004, third reading amendment number 2. We reject the first change, the page 6, line 14. We reject that, and we adopt the second change, which is the pages 18, line 1 through 3. In other words, we reject it for the first grant program, and we accept it for the second grant program, which was the loan to grant program.
Second.
Okay. Senator Bebout.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and maybe an amendment to that. And I would ask Brian, again, it gets back to wordsmithing, but is there any other language, and you're really good at it too, Mr. Chairman, as well, that we could come with some way we could say it differently so we don't in fact open a way more open like your concern is, but we allow a little latitude in there. I'm just looking at that language. Yeah, I don't know how you do that. Brian, you got any ideas?
Chairman, Senator Bebout, I think the question is, you have basically 2 points. you know, where at in between those 2 points would you want to fall in terms of, you know, as a result of the public health crisis is quite broad. You know, you just point to any sort of impact associated with COVID. That's what that language contemplates. The existing language is really, you know, there was an order entered. Because of that order, my normal business was interrupted. So that's kind of the line between the two, and the question would be where between that, you know, if there is a place between that to fall that you would want to come out at.
And, you know, Senator Bebout, I'm trying to, you know, so we said our public health orders, and maybe we can be clearer. Our intent was public health orders that were issued anywhere in the state, because I don't think this happened, but if one county issued very severe health orders, and the adjoining county kind of relied upon that county for like motel business or whatever, that would affect that motel business. We weren't talking about specifically in the county. We were trying to make that the health orders be maybe we use the term anywhere in the state of Wyoming or something. Yeah, Senator Bebout.
Mr. Chairman, what if you said, and maybe this, as a result of any closure of the public health orders with respect to COVID-19, you say it earlier, you're just saying it again relative to the public health orders. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, that might be a little clearer. Sure. Yeah, Brian, what? I'm going to ask Brian Sender because he probably wrote it down.
So, Mr. Chairman, what I understand is, and this would just be in the section 2 language,
Right.
Is that after or public health orders, insert associated with COVID-19. And also based on the discussion, Mr. Chairman, Senator Bebout, you know, another suggestion would be to insert state or local before public health orders.
Mr. Chairman, I think that was section 3, only section 3, because our motion is to drop section 2. It's the second grant program, but it's section 3. Is that right, Brian?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Anderson, I understood at least Senator Bebout's discussion to be focused on amending the language in section 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with those. That it keeps it within the scope of what we were working before, and maybe makes it clearer. So I mean, that's what we're here for. So I think I'm fine with that. Good. Maybe let's do this, Brian. If you could say that again, let's get a nod from Senator Bebout, and then the first and second, see if they agree with that.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. So this would be after or public health. So it would be a result. Required closure shall also include the interruption of a business's normal business as a result of any closures or state or local public health orders associated with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay. Is that good with the first and second?
Can't object to that. That's fine.
Yeah, I think it's good language. So, all right.
So
That's the section 2 only, right, Senator?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead, Chairman Anderson.
So I think Rothfuss' motion was to eliminate section 2 and just keep section 3, but we're amending section 2 here.
Yeah,
So
I think President Bebout we just had a friendly amendment to it.
But if we don't keep section 2, his friendly amendment doesn't work.
Well, but his friendly amendment might have just kind of rolled right over the top of Senator Rothfuss's.
Yeah, it's fine. It'll do.
Okay.
I think the key concept is it got rid of the part that we're concerned about. There's a couple of words that are of concern, and those are gone, so we're good.
Okay.
Everybody good? You got a thumbs up on that, everybody?
Yeah.
Brian, I think we're done. Are we done?
Mr. Chairman, I think the only matter would be identifying which of the two identical amendments you wish to adopt.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman,
so I'm confused now, and I should know this. Oh, go ahead, Michael, Mr. Swain.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to, I think Brian's on the right track. What we need to do is go through that summary sheet and verify exactly which ones are deleted, adopted, or deleted, further amend.
Yeah, so, okay. Sorry, 10 years I should have this down. Then we take this back and each house votes on it as like Senate File 1004. Is that how we do it? So it really matters on if we make this a Senate or a House, and do we make that decision, or do the presiding officers?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the bodies will choose which bill to incorporate it in. But you also have to make sure that we have the proper amendments cited in the Joint Conference Committee report.
Okay.
And on that point, remember in our modified rules, the chairmanship of this joint conference committee, even though there was a deference at the beginning, was actually set based on a back and forth of the first conference committee shall be led by the Senate, the second by the House, et cetera. And that probably also governs which bill will be used. With the budget, we do that on a yearly basis. We switch back and forth. With this special session, it was set in the original rules. So there actually is an answer. I think this is a House bill. No, it's the third. This is the third joint conference committee call. That makes it a Senate file based on the rules. So this,
this conform that language into make that fit with the Senate.
Yep. So this will be a Senate file 1004, and yeah, we can march through then the joint conference committee action on the amendments.
Okay, so Mr. Schwenk, what do you need from us? I haven't been on appropriations for a while, so we may have to lean heavily on Senator Bebout to help us do the adopt and amend and further amend stuff. I forgot how to do it.
Mr. Chairman, if you look at your summary sheet.
Yeah, I have mine up. Does everybody else have theirs up?
Yeah.
Yep.
There should be a second column that says JCC action. And then under that, what we will do is we will record your vote on each individual amendment. So for the first two, the committee has to choose which one to delete, which one to adopt. Even though they're identical, we just have to have that for the report.
Okay.
I'll move to adopt the House 2003.
Second.
All in favor? Okay.
And does that motion incorporate deleting the second one?
I'll move to delete Senate 2008.
Yep. Okay.
I
All
should have
in
made
favor?
those together. Should have made
All
those
in favor?
together.
Okay. All right. I'm getting the hang of it again. Okay. So then with respect to Senate amendment, the Steinmetz amendment, we need to adopt and further amend. Is that how that would go?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay. Is there a motion there? Okay. You got a motion second. All in favor? Got it. Okay. And then Mr. Swank, with the third reading amendment on that, we don't really need that title anymore, right? So we should delete that?
I believe so.
Yes.
Okay.
Although I'll defer to Anna, since that amended the previous one, does that have to be delete and further amend?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify the previous motion. That should probably be a delete.
Delete and further amend. Yeah. Yeah, that was what I was thinking too.
Oh, delete and further amend.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh,
Yeah. So
we get
withdraw. Let's strike the last motion and do that over. Do over. Motion to delete and further amend. We'll just call it entry 3 and entry 4. So Senate second reading amendment number 1, Senate second reading amendment number 1, and Senate third reading amendment number 3. Move to delete and further amend.
Okay. Second by Duncan. All in favor? Okay. Unanimous. Okay.
And then I'll defer to Brian and Anna on this one, but you have to adopt either House second reading number 4 or Senate second reading number 6. They're identical,
Let's do
but I don't know
Senate.
if there's a preference.
Let's do the Senate.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to adopt the Senate bill on that. S2006 AC, line 7.
Okay, Brian has hand up. Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to Anna on this, but I believe since in each of those programs, we added the language regarding the 100 employees for the, that exception. I think this too would be a delete and further amend.
And would that take in all the rest of the amendments? Would be a delete and further amend? Is that right?
Mhm.
Okay, then we're
So
done.
moved.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
No, 1 second.
I believe,
okay, somebody,
sorry. I believe
Go ahead,
second reading number 4, the Beitman amendment.
Yeah.
It was technically adopted, even though it was stricken. It should be a motion to delete.
okay, let's clean that up then. Let's clean that up so we can do all the others in one amendment. Okay,
And then, Mr. Chairman, on third reading amendment number 2 from the Senate, that's where we further amend it. So we would probably say adopt and further amend there.
Delete and further amend.
okay,
So
all
you're saying,
folks tracking?
But one more point, we're going to need a deletion on, for example, the House amendment is a straight up delete. It's not a further amend. So
Correct.
motion to delete on House second reading amendment number 4 is a straight
Second.
delete.
Okay.
Okay.
There's a second. All right, all in favor? Okay,
And
Now-
Mr. Chairman, do we need
now
a,
let's drop down to box number 6, which is Senate second reading amendment number 4. We do need to delete that. As I understand that correctly?
It
No.
doesn't exist.
No.
Okay, that's what I thought. But Mr. Swank, you were saying something about it though.
Mr. Chairman, even though it was stricken by the Rothfuss, it was technically an adopted amendment, so it needs to be deleted.
Okay,
Okay.
Okay, so is there,
so move.
all in favor of that motion? Okay, that passes. Okay, so now we should be on more of a comprehensive amendment. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, do we need to delete that line 9, Senate 3004, since we changed that 100? Or is that in the delete and add on the others?
So let me see if I understand this right. We are going to take, so Senate Amendment, second reading 6, Senate Amendment third reading 2, and Senate Amendment third reading 4, and delete and further amend. Is that the correct motion that we would want?
We did that, I think, Mr. Chairman.
I thought we did that.
Yeah, I
Just
think we
go ahead,
did.
just, okay. Okay, so we had second, everybody was in favor of that?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Mr. Swank, do you have what you need from us?
I believe so, and I'll work with Brian and Anna to do the JCC report.
So how are we going to approve the JCC report via an email approval? Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. So what will happen now is, we'll prepare the report, get it reviewed, and then we will send it out to each of the 6 of you who will then need to respond back by email or phone that you approve having your signature added to that.
Okay.
And once we hear back, then it'll be prepared for distribution.
Yeah, Senator Bebout.
Yeah, Brian, Brian, why don't we use DocuSign
Yeah. Why don't we just e-sign?
or e-sign?
Mhm.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're going to keep this a little lower tech maybe.
Go ahead, Anna.
Mr. Chairman, we don't have DocuSign yet. IT has looked into it. We do have everybody's electronic signature, though, that we will add to the document.
Mr. Chairman,
So, Mr. Chairman, you'll get an email out saying this is what it is, and then we'll verify by an I vote with an email back.
Yeah.
And you'll affix our signatures to the conference committee report.
Okay. All right. Are we good, everybody?
We are.
I have, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator.
on the aggregate thing, we never got into that anymore. Tell me where you think we are. So can somebody get up to 10 loans or 10 grants now? Is that where this will stay? Or are you gonna let the business council be the gatekeeper?
Yeah.
We'll let the business to be the gatekeeper.
Yeah. That's where we ended up on that.
I share your concern, Senator, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think we were allowing special circumstances basically to dictate that. and their
And
judgment.
the other thing too, Mr. Chairman, is the first committee I ever served on was the Minerals Committee, and boy, what a great start. And John Martin was my chair in the House, and then I've served on it many times, chaired it, and the three of you are on it. It's a great committee and good work on this. This is good work. Congratulations to all of you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
you
Senator.
know, and for the folks here is, and I see Chris or Senator Rothfuss knows on Management Council, we kind of lobbied to pull this away from Management Council, bring it to Minerals, because we just such a good group of people on there with a lot of business experience, and I think that helps us get this through. So, Senator Beba, your contribution to the committee today was awesome. We appreciate it, and damn it, I'm gonna miss you. I hate to say it.
Yeah.
You're fun to argue with.
Yeah.
All right.
All for the better good.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.